The prairie woke in silence, its breath caught in the frost. Thin blades of grass, stiff with ice, bent beneath the weight of dawn's pale light. Out on the edge of town, where the old rail tracks had rusted to red scars against the earth, a figure moved slowly. It was not a man. It was not the proud stride of a stallion, either. It was the broken shuffle of a black horse whose coat had dulled to gray ash. Ribs pressing sharp against skin stretched thin as parchment. The horse limped, pausing often as if each step asked permission of the ground. Its eyes, clouded with age and sorrow, still held something stubborn, something unbroken. Children tossed stones from behind fences, daring each other to get closer. The horse did not flinch, did not fight, only carried on, as if dignity could outlast cruelty. At the general store, gossip gathered like flies. "Looks like death on 4 legs," muttered a ranch hand. "Bad luck to keep a beast like that wandering," said another, spitting tobacco into the dust. Marshal Harlan Price, tall and rigid as a fence post, remarked, "Ought to be put down. Best end its misery before it spreads." Among the voices, one man stood silent. Elias Boone, a farmer whose shoulders bore the memory of better years, leaned against the wagon he had come to town to fill with grain he could barely afford. His eyes lingered on the horse, not with mockery but with a tired knowing. He understood what it meant to be dismissed, to have the world decide you were no longer worth the effort. His wife had passed 2 winters ago, and with her, much of his will. His farm struggled on parched soil, his hands raw and empty of joy. He was a man the town pitied in whispers, but never helped. That evening, Elias took the long road home, wheels of his wagon groaning over ruts carved deep by spring floods. Near the abandoned tracks, he saw it again, the black horse. The poor creature had collapsed to its knees, head bent low, sides trembling with each thin breath. The world had given up on this animal, just as it had given up on him. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop. He stepped down, his boots sinking into soft earth. From his coat pocket, he drew the crust of bread he had saved from his supper. Slowly, carefully, he approached. The horse's ears flicked, body tensed, ready to flee, but strength failed it. Elias crouched low, the bread resting in his open palm. "Easy now," he whispered, voice softer than he had spoken in weeks. His words were not meant to be heard, but to fill the silence between them. The horse sniffed, nostrils flaring, then turned its head aside. Elias placed the bread upon the ground and stepped back. Hunger overcame caution. The horse lowered its lips, teeth scraping dry earth, and took the offering. For a moment the two remained, man and beast, strangers bound by the same quiet ache of being left behind. By the time the moon rose, Elias had tied a frayed rope gently around the horse's neck, leading it with care toward his wagon. The horse followed slowly, as though unsure whether this kindness was real. Elias lifted the gate, coaxed the animal up, and began the long ride home. In town, laughter followed him. A voice jeered, "Boone's traded his fortune for a sack of bones." Another laughed, "That nag'll drain you before spring's out." Even Marshal Price shook his head, muttering of foolishness. But not every eye carried scorn. From a porch at the edge of the street, Clara Dawson stood in her plain calico dress, her hair tied back against the wind. She watched Elias pass with the horse in tow. She said nothing, but her gaze held a softness, a flicker of recognition, as if she too knew what it meant to salvage something broken. Elias did not notice. His eyes stayed on the road. The farm was quiet when he brought the horse through the gate. The old barn sagged, timbers bowed with years of storms, but it was shelter. Elias unlatched the door and led the animal inside. The smell of dust and hay wrapped around them. He fetched a bucket, filled it with the last of the water drawn from his well, and placed it near the horse's nose. The animal drank slowly, as though savoring each drop. Elias brushed at the coat, his rough hands moving with a tenderness they had not known in years. Flakes of dried mud and burrs fell away, revealing patches of black that still shone beneath the neglect. Nights were cold. That first evening, Elias laid his own wool blanket across the horse's back. He watched as the creature shivered, then settled, breathing more evenly. Elias sat on a stool nearby, listening to the barn's timbers creak, to the slow rhythm of another life beside his own. Days passed in a rhythm of labor. Elias chopped wood, mended fences, tilled soil too stubborn to give much. Each morning he returned to the barn, and each morning the horse lifted its head a little higher. He spoke to it, not in words of command, but of company. He told it about the fields, about the neighbors, even about his late wife when the loneliness grew too heavy. The horse did not answer, but sometimes it listened, and that was enough. One evening, as Elias scattered oats into a trough, he felt a weight at his shoulder. He turned to find the horse had leaned gently against him, its breath warm on his sleeve. It was not trust fully given, but it was something, a crack in the wall of silence between them. Elias stood there for a long time, still as stone, until the horse withdrew. In town, the whispers grew sharper. Jed Carter, smug with the profit of his ranch, joked loudly in the saloon, "Boone's keeping a ghost horse for company. Reckon they'll starve together." The men laughed, glasses slamming against wood. But Clara Dawson, seated quietly in the corner, lowered her gaze, her lips pressed thin. She did not laugh. For Elias, the scorn mattered less with each day. There was work in caring for another life, and in that work purpose returned. At night, when the wind rattled the shutters, he no longer felt the emptiness press so heavily. The horse had begun to rise without struggle, its eyes clearer, its steps steadier. And though Elias did not yet name it, in his heart he called the animal something it had long forgotten, worthy. Winter loosened its grip, though the prairie carried scars of cold. The earth softened, rivers swelled, and the air grew restless with spring storms. Elias Boone rose each morning to find the horse stronger, shoulders filling out, steps surer. He had not named it, not aloud, though in his silence he sometimes whispered Ashen, a name born from the color of its weary coat, and the fire he hoped still smoldered within. But strength came slow. Weeks of sacrifice had carved Elias thinner, his meals smaller, his cheeks hollow. He traded bread for oats, meat for hay, and when the hunger gnawed, he drank water and told himself it was enough. The town noticed. Gossip sharpened like knives. At the saloon, Jed Carter leaned against the bar, boasting over whiskey. "Boone's feeding a corpse. Won't be long before he follows it into the dirt." Laughter rose, careless and cruel. Marshal Harlan Price, seated nearby, shook his head. "Man's lost. Let him waste himself if he pleases. Ain't no law against foolishness." But Clara Dawson, who had come for flour, paused at the words. She had buried her own husband 3 winters past, her heart worn thin with silence since. She carried her sorrow quietly, stitched into her days like thread no one saw. Yet when she passed Elias's farm and saw him bent over the horse, hands patient, movements tender, something in her chest stirred, a reminder that broken things could be mended, if only someone cared enough to try. One evening, she appeared at Elias's gate with a bundle of spare hay tied in rough twine. "Had more than I needed," she said, her voice even but eyes soft. Elias knew it was not true, but he did not name the lie. Instead, he nodded once, wordless thanks passing between them. He lit his lantern, held it aloft as she walked home, her figure fading into the twilight. No declarations, no promises, only the quiet exchange of grace. The horse began to change. Its coat grew darker, shinier where once it had dulled to dust. Its legs, though scarred, carried it with new strength. One morning, Elias opened the barn doors to let it into the pasture. The animal lifted its head high, nostrils wide, and broke into a run. It was not graceful, not yet. Its stride faltered, hooves slipped, but it ran. Elias's chest swelled, laughter bursting from him, rusty and unfamiliar. For the first time in years, joy found its way to his lips. Children at the fence watched, their jeers softened into awe. Townsfolk passing on wagons slowed to see. Whispers shifted. "Boone's horse," they said, voices tinged with wonder instead of ridicule. The old black ghost had become something else, a story worth telling. But the prairie is never gentle for long. That spring, a storm rose sudden and violent. Clouds stacked heavy as mountains, winds tearing across the land with a howl that bent trees to their roots. Rain lashed fields, turning soil to rivers of mud. Elias, inside his barn, heard the crack of wood splintering, his pasture fence collapsing under the storm's rage. He rushed out into the torrent. Cattle from Jed Carter's ranch had broken loose, scattered across the fields, bawling in panic. If they weren't gathered, they'd be lost or killed in the flood-swollen gullies. Lanterns flickered along the horizon, Jed's men trying and failing to bring them back in the storm. Elias turned to the horse. Ashen pawed the ground, muscles trembling but alive, eyes alight not with fear but fire. Elias knew what it asked without words. He threw a saddle across its back, leather slick with rain. For a heartbeat he hesitated. This horse was still mending, still fragile. But storms did not wait for gentleness. He swung into the saddle, gripping the reins tight. "Come on, boy," he murmured. "Let's show 'em." And into the storm they rode. Lightning tore across the sky, thunder rolling like cannon fire. The black horse surged forward, hooves pounding mud and water. Together they cut across the fields, circling cattle with sharp turns, driving them toward higher ground. Elias leaned low, calling, whistling, guiding the herd with every ounce of strength left in his lungs. Ashen slipped once, nearly fell, but righted himself, surging harder. His breath came harsh, steam mixing with the rain. Yet in his eyes burned something fierce, something untamed, a spirit reborn. Jed Carter and his men gaped through the downpour as Elias and the once-abandoned horse turned chaos into order. One by one, cattle gathered, pushed toward safety. What mockery had once filled their voices now turned to stunned silence. When at last the storm broke and the herd stood together on solid ground, Elias reined the horse to a stop. Both man and beast heaved with exhaustion, soaked to the bone, but neither bowed. They had faced the storm and prevailed. Jed rode up, water dripping from his hat, shame heavy in his eyes. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a voice stripped of pride, he muttered, "Boone, maybe some things ain't meant to be thrown away. Maybe I was wrong." Elias only nodded, too tired for words. Beside him, Ashen stood tall, chest heaving, dark coat gleaming wet but proud. In the days that followed, word spread. The town that once scorned now spoke in reverence. Children no longer threw stones, they reached out, wide-eyed, to touch the black horse whose spirit had defied death itself. Neighbors offered food, supplies, a helping hand. Elias accepted little, but in his heart he felt something long forgotten: respect. On a quiet morning when the sky stretched clear and endless, Elias stood at his gate. Clara approached, her steps steady, her hands folded loosely before her. She looked at the horse, then at Elias, her gaze filled with something unspoken. "You saved more than cattle that night," she said softly. Elias met her eyes. He did not answer, but he reached out, rough hand finding hers. They stood there as the sun rose. Two souls no longer carrying their burdens alone, and Ashen grazed nearby, no longer a ghost, but a living reminder of what patience and faith could resurrect. The narrator's voice carried, gentle and sure. In the wild country, dignity is not given. It is fought for, fed with patience, carried on a tired back until the day it rises again. The world may forget the broken, but all it takes is one heart, steady and true, to believe. And belief is enough to bring life back from ashes. The scene faded on Elias. Clara and the black horse standing together in the dawn, and to you, dear soul who listens, remember this: every man, every beast, every heart waits for one moment, one hand, one voice that says, "You are worth saving." If you find yourself broken, do not despair. Somewhere, someone will see you. Somewhere, someone will lead you home.